guest today on the Writers' Corner live show is Edward Willett. He is the award-winning author of more than 60 books spanning science fiction, fantasy, non-fiction for readers of all ages. He also hosts the award-winning podcast, The Worldshapers. Don't go away. We will be right back. If you're just joining us, then you are watching the Writers' Corner live show. Welcome. I'm your host, Bridgetti Limbanda from Cape Town in South Africa. Our stream today is made possible by StreamYard, Creative Edge, and BeLive Media. A special warm welcome to you, our viewers, if you're watching us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, also on Amazon Live. Then a very warm welcome to you, because this is an audience-centric show. So do say hello. If you've got a question for the author, please feel free to do so. If you've never watched the show before, please type new in the comment and we'll give you a shout out. But whatever you do, do say hello to us in the comments. Before we welcome our amazing author for today, Edward Willett, I want to first introduce my friend and co-host, Mary Elizabeth Jackson. She's a special needs and disabilities advocate and the award-winning author of the Poolicious children's book series, and she lives in the Nashville area. So let us know where in the world you are joining us from. Mary, welcome to the show.
Hi, I am so excited to be here, and we are both international bestsellers and #1 Amazon bestsellers. We're so excited about that, aren't we?
Yes, we absolutely are. Just recently, we've released 2 books, The Fearless Entrepreneurs and Invisible No More, Invincible Forevermore. And before we bring our guests on, I just want to mention that I'm especially excited about the release of the book Invisible No More, Invincible Forevermore, because September is the month in which we do
suicide prevention.
Yes. And I believe that it should be an awareness that's not only in the month of September, but it should be all year round. We should always be conscious of suicide prevention. And it's a collection of stories. There are 29 of us in the book that at some point in our lives have felt invisible, and that often is one of the triggers for people who feel suicidal, is that they feel invisible in the world. So please do have a look at that book. And Ross Boundy is joining us from Australia. Ross,
Hi.
Welcome to the show. So great to see you. Welcome. And our guest today, I mean, my mind is blown when I read Edward's bio and looked at all the stuff that he's done, that he's accomplished. I was like, oh my goodness, yes. I cannot wait to have this man on the show today.
I know, we've been looking so forward to having him on, because I love how creative he is in his mind, and he just, you know, he's done so many things, and it looks like he's not going to stop anytime soon at all. And we're really glad for that, because he has put out some amazing books, and he's brilliant. So it's so fun to talk to him. It will be so fun to talk to him. Yes.
Emilia, welcome to the show. And so Edward is the award-winning author of more than 60 books.
I know. Can you imagine? Right?
I can't even wrap my head around that, Mary. Just like I cannot.
He's got Thornton Beat, and he's almost up there with Ken Abrahams, right? So yeah, but it means that he has been a very busy guy.
Very, very busy man. Yes. So he covers science fiction, fantasy, nonfiction. He's the award-winning host of the podcast, The Worldshapers. And he's also the owner and editor of Shadow Paw Press. And Shadow Paw apparently is the name of his dog.
Right. I know. Isn't that great? I like to always
Yes.
ask people, why do they name their businesses? What they, there's always a backstory. So we always like to know that.
Absolutely. So you know what? Enough of this waffle. Shall we just get Edward onto the show now?
Yes, let's bring
And
him
so
on.
he can tell us more about himself, which is what we really, really want to know. So let's welcome him to the show.
Hi, do you like that intro?
Yeah, I have to correct you right away, though. It's the name of my cat, not my dog.
Is it your cat?
He'd be horrified. So I have to set
The
that
dog
straight.
would be like, "Oh, I am so insulted. I will never come in the house again."
Yeah. Well, if he wasn't sound asleep somewhere, I don't think I have to worry about him finding out. So.
Right. Oh, bless his heart. Well, please tell him we're very sorry. We do not want to offend him.
We do apologize.
Yes. Hey, it's an animal. She got an animal, right? So she got part of it right.
4 legs, this is close enough.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Edward, right out of the gate, I want to ask you, with 60 books to your credit, spanning several genres, do you even have a favorite? I mean, among some of your works, I went through this and I'm like, where to start? There's Moonlit World, there's Blue Fire, Star Song. Then you've written about stuff like meningitis, Ebola virus, arthritis, hemophilia, Alzheimer's, negative body image, Johnny Cash, Hurricane Irma, the basics of quantum physics, the understanding of photoelectric effect and line spectra. Then you've written about Andrew Merkel.
You know what?
Mind blown.
I have a new title for him, Edward the Spectrum, right? There you go, everyone.
I don't know. I mean, I started writing very young. I always wanted to be a science fiction and fantasy writer right from the beginning. The first short story I wrote was called Castor Glass Hypership Test Pilot. And I was 11, so that kind of shows you where my mind was. Very early on. And I wrote novels in high school, but I went into journalism. So I was a newspaper reporter and then an editor of my hometown newspaper. I was editor at the age of 24. I was editor of the newspaper. And then I worked for the Saskatchewan Science Center for a few years. So I always had an interest in science and nonfiction. And so when I went freelance, my very first book was actually using Microsoft Publisher for Windows 95. That was my first published book.
I saw that as well.
Yeah. So the nonfiction side, I wrote a science column for years. I was a guest on radio talking about science. And so I started working for educational publishers. That's why I have this wide range of topics, because they would give me a list and say, we need people to write these books. I said, I can learn anything. So I'll write that or I'll write that. And that's how I ended up doing, like a biography of Ayatollah Khomeini, a biography of Andy Warhol and Johnny Cash, and the quantum physics book. And I wrote Genetics Demystified for McGraw-Hill. But then all through that, I was also writing fictions. And one reason I have 60 books, I always like to be honest, is that a lot of those educational books are very short. They're like 20,000 words max. So they did pile up pretty quickly there for a while. Wow. But it's about 20 novels at this point as well.
Oh, that's really, really awesome. And what a great opportunity that you've had in your life to write outside of a genre or be multi-genre author, you know what I mean? Instead of being like you're completely fantasy or romance or murder, mystery, that kind of thing. So what an honor it is. One of the questions I really wanted to ask you, and I've wondered this before, you're writing under your name. Why write under a pseudonym or a different name? What's your purpose for that?
It wasn't really my purpose. It was something that the publisher wanted. So that my main publisher, my big publisher, is Daw Books. I'm currently, my 12th novel will be coming out from them for Daw Books next year. And my first 3 books for them were science fiction. And then they said, fantasy is selling better than science fiction right now. This was a few years ago. Why don't you write a fantasy? And since I was changing genres, they said, get a fresh start in the marketplace. Why don't you use a new name? So I went with E.C. Blake, which is my initials, Edward Chain Willett, E.C. And Blake was my nephew's middle name. And my mom suggested that. And if your mom says you should use it, well, then, of course, that was what I did. And then then right after that, that was a 3-book trilogy, and it was basically well, actually, I've got maybe I have it backwards. I do have it backwards. I first did a standalone fantasy, and that was Lee Arthur Chane, which is the middle names of me and my 2 older brothers. And then it was E.C. Blake, and this fantasy was completely different from what Lee Arthur Chane had written because it was functionally YA with a 15-year-old female protagonist, and that's why I suggested another pseudonym, and EC, the initials, because maybe people would think I was a woman if they cared who was writing this story about this girl. So we never really pretended I was female, but that was part of the thinking that went into that. But then after that, I got to go back to being Edward Willett again. And the other pseudonym I wrote was for a completely different reason. It was Adam Blade, and he's the house name for the Beast Wars children's fantasy series. So anybody who writes for that series gets called Adam Blade. It's like Nancy Drew books, or they all have the same name on them, but the actual Carolyn Keene is long gone. But Nancy Drew is still being written by other authors. So that was the other reason for a pseudonym.
I love
That's
it.
very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I liked being Adam Blade because he was described as his bio was he was a 20-something Englishman who had a pet capuchin monkey and liked to go rock climbing on the weekends. And, yeah, that's me.
In your mind, it's you, yes. And I think when people have initials, for some reason, I don't know, I think people are drawn to books that have 2 initials and a last name. Don't you?
It's very common, yeah.
It is very common, yes.
But it was much more common in the old days in science fiction and fantasy. The reason for the pseudonym was a woman writing, and publisher or the author didn't want people to know it was a woman because there weren't a lot of women writing science fiction and fantasy. There were always some, but you had a few pseudonyms back then for that reason. That was a long time ago, though.
Yeah, very interesting. So your latest books are Star Song, and your upcoming book is Shapers of Worlds Volume 2, for which you ran a very, very successful Kickstarter, and I believe you're about to launch that. Can you tell us a little bit about these 2 books?
Well, I'll start with the anthology. My podcast, The Worldshapers, is one where I interview other science fiction and fantasy authors. And after I've been doing it for a few months, was at the annual general meeting of Sask Books, which is the Saskatchewan Book Publishers Association, which I'm now on the board of. And this woman came in and did a presentation about how she had kickstarted an anthology. She'd raised like $100,000, but she had connections to the comics industry, and they're really big on Kickstarters and comics. I said, hey, I know some authors. So it took me a while to climb that learning curve of doing a Kickstarter and to get up the gumption to try it. But then I ran one last year. It succeeded. I have the first one here, although the second one's not out yet. But this was the first anthology, Shapers of Worlds. And you can see there's some fairly impressive names on there, like Tanya Huff and L.D. Modisett Jr. and John Scalzi. And, we had Hugo Award winners, Nebula Award winners, British Science Fiction Award winners. And it was very successful. So I thought, hey, I'll do it again. So this year I went with, those were guests for my first year because I had to cut it off somewhere. So the new one is guests for my second year. It's a third longer than that one. It's going to be about 540 pages in print, 140,000 words of fiction. And again, it's huge names in the field. Some of them people like Garth Nix. And of course, immediately the names go out of your head when you say things like that. But other Kelly Armstrong, Nancy Kress, Carrie Vaughn, S.M. Sterling, again, big names in the field. And that's just about ready to go on pre-sale. I think maybe in the next few days it'll pop up as available for pre-orders on Amazon. And the release date that I've settled on is November 2nd. So that's when it will be available widely. After I get the Kickstarter rewards out, they'll go out in October. And then the other book is Star Song, which this one I'm very fond of because it started as a short story called The Minstrel, one of the very first short stories that I sold way back in the 80s. And I immediately tried to turn it into a book. And it almost sold to a major publisher in about 1991, 92. Josephus Sherman was editing at Walker and Company. And I'd sent it in. She said, oh, you need to put in a lot more stuff. You left this big time gap in the middle. So I filled that in, resubmitted it. She said she was ready to make an offer. The publisher of Walker and Company died. His son took over and decided that they weren't publishing science fiction anymore. And that was the end. I never found a home for it, even though it came that close 30 years ago. well, now I have my own publishing company. And so I finally put it out. And I went back and looked at it. And of course, after 30 years, I did find a few things I wanted to change. So I rewrote it completely from start to finish, gave it a second viewpoint character, not just the boy. There's also a girl. And now they both get viewpoint sections. And it's out. So I'm very, very happy to see that one come out at last.
Wow.
Well, congratulations. A favorite section in there that you could read to us?
I
just
do.
To give us a bit of a, without giving too much away, but just to kind of give us a little bit of a taste of the book.
Yes.
I can do that. And I guess I didn't actually explain what it's about, so I'll do that now as well.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
It's a young adult science fiction, far future, and basically my main character, Chris Lamarck, has been raised on a planet that he doesn't really belong on. I mean, he's visibly different from the people who live there. And he's been raised in this little backwater village or farm, really, not even in the village, by a guardian whom he was given to by his long dead parents. He knows nothing about his parents, except they left him this, what seems to be a musical instrument that he calls a touch lyre. He just touches it and it will play if he thinks what he wants to play. And he comes back. This is not a spoiler because it's in like the first 4 pages. He comes back and finds out that his guardian has been murdered. And so he's left on his own, and he decides he will take this instrument, which he knows can't possibly be from this planet. He'll go to the main spaceport city. He will find a way into space, and he will try to figure out through this instrument who his parents were if he has family out there. Turns out the instrument is wanted by some very powerful people who will stop at nothing to get it because it's actually a powerful alien artifact. And he falls in with this girl of a space-going family, kind of gypsy-like family. And that's how he gets into space. And so it goes on from there. So this is when he gets to the spaceport. And this is kind of the central metaphor. It's on the cover, really, in a way, the starships are. And it's kind of the metaphor of the whole book. And it's a metaphor for me, which is this young guy, kid on the prairie, looking at the stars and wanting to go to them. And the only way I could get there was through books. Well, my character in the book gets to go to them in reality. So, and this is when he sees the starships. He turned and continued toward the spaceport. The transport soon passed him going the other way, stopping again at another loading dock a little farther on. He crossed to the other side of the street to avoid it. Ahead, the road ended in a T intersection with a much broader road along which traffic passed in both directions. Beyond that stood a tall fence, and beyond that a vast expanse of Juracrete baking in the sun. Sore feet forgotten, he broke into a run, burst out onto the busy road, dodged traffic to cross it, clung to the wire mesh fence on the far side of it, and drank in his first close-up view of starships. Curved, mirrored flanks cast back sharp reflections of the city and narrowed to needle-sharp, glittering prows pointing at the sky, at the stars, at his future. Chris drank in the sight, silently vowing he would be aboard one of those vessels when it launched. He saw someone come around a landing strut of the nearest ship, a slender figure, a young boy or girl. He couldn't tell at that distance, and his heart ached with the desire to be that youth, to stand there at the base of a starship, to gaze out at a strange new world he had never visited before. So,
very, very nice. We thank authors like you who write things like this for us to, yes, Roz, I agree, to help us to go to those places. It's really, really, it's amazing because not everybody has vision like that, right? And it's really hard as an author and a writer to go get what's in your head out on paper. Some people aren't ever able to do it successfully, but I would say you've done it very successfully. And I want to ask you, turning out as many books as you have, what is your secret for publishing things quickly or in succession the way that you have done over the years? And what is your most successful published book or your favorite?
Those are two different questions. But, I don't know. Maybe they're not. I can't really say what's my favorite published book. I love them all at the time they're coming out.
Yes.
And of course, by the time you've read them and reread them and reread them and reread them and revised them and rewritten them, and then the page proofs come and you read them again. And when the book actually appears, it's like, well, I've been there and done that. And you're on to the next thing.
Right.
But my most successful book sales-wise, I guess, is probably Masks, which was the first book in the Masks of Agreement trilogy that I wrote as E.C. Blake. And I do like that one a lot. It was a trilogy and hardcover, and it was very nice to have that. I like that one a lot. I also like my most recent series for DAW, which is the Worldshaper series. The Moonlit World is book 3 in that series, but that they seem to be done with that. So I'll be writing it, but I'll be putting it out myself to continue that series. And then the other one I always like to mention is the Shards of Excalibur young adult fantasy series. It's a modern day fantasy series. The books are only about 60,000 words each, 5 of them, and it tells the story of a young girl from right here in Regina who is walking around Wascana Lake, which is about a block and a half from my house. And she sees the Lady of the Lake is in Wascana Lake, because everybody's got to be somewhere.
Right.
And she tells this girl that she's now the Lady of the Lake, and she and this boy that are with her have to find the scattered shards of Excalibur all over the world before Merlin can. He's the bad guy in the book. So I had great fun with that. And I really like to point that one up as well. I think for my absolute favorite series that I've done, it's a toss-up between Masks of Agrima and Shards of Excalibur.
Oh, I can't wait. Okay, we're going to get the Shards of Excalibur, absolutely, because we're huge Merlin fans. I can't wait. And so how do you feel like, how have you been able to churn out such a huge variety? I mean, it takes a lot of people to do that, I know, unless, people who self-publish can put out books constantly.
Yeah, well, and I do both. So with with the DAW books, it's tended to be about a book a year. I missed a year here and there. Like this year, I won't have a new one, although the last one came out in late 2021, the Moonlit World, 2020. And the next one, which is a humorous space opera called The Tangled Stars, which I've just submitted, will be out next year sometime. So I don't have much control over that. But I've often worked with multiple publishers. So sometimes I'll have books coming out from more than one publisher in a year. And then I am publishing now through Shadowpaw Press. And so if there is something I want to get out fairly quickly, I can do that if I can find the time to do all the work that it requires to put something out. I'm only one person. I need a staff. But
yes, I agree. Well, thank you for sharing.
I think that's something we always want. Is like, can we please can we clone ourselves?
That would be nice. Yeah.
I think it's what most of us would want. Ross wants to know, is it easiest? I know. Ross wants to know, is it easiest to write as a close-to-home theme or totally creative and imagined?
Good question.
They're very different, that's for sure. One of the things if you're writing something set in the real world, you want to, I think there's more research involved if you write something set in the real world, because you want to make sure you don't get something totally screwed up. So in the Shards of Excalibur books, I set it all over the world, but I couldn't go there. But, Google is your friend. And with Google Street View, I could do a pretty good job of describing very specific streets in like Wellington, New Zealand, I think was one of the places I was in, or lakes in New Zealand. You can get images and work from that. So that, I think, is it's actually a bit more work writing something set in the present day in the real world for that reason. If I'm setting it, on the other hand, it's just a different kind of work. If I'm setting it in a world I've entirely made up, I have to make it up. So that's a different kind of work than trying to make sure that you get facts right for something set in the here and now. So I've done both. I tend to write more in pure fantasy worlds or in far future worlds than I've written in more present day. But yeah, I have done both.
So apart from just being an accomplished author, you've also started a very, very successful podcast called Worldshapers. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you get started into podcasting? I mean, apart from the fact that you've got a magical voice.
I can't take credit for that. I inherited it. Well, I've done broadcasting of various sorts for a long time. Of course, first I was on newspapers, and that was different. But once I started working at the Saskatchewan Science Centre as communications officer, which I did for 5 years in its early years, which is what brought me to Regina, I was a regular guest on radio, CBC Saskatchewan, for like 17 years. I was the weekly science guest. And I've been on TV a couple of times talking about science. And I hosted a community radio program, and for 10 years I hosted a community television program. And with the journalism background, I was used to interviewing people. So I thought, that sounds like a podcast possibly. And I thought about it for a long time. And then I finally did it. Again, there was a learning curve, figuring out how to get it online and the hosting and all that stuff. And I wanted to time it with the beginning of the Worldshapers book series. That's why it has the same name. And again, I've met lots of science fiction fantasy authors over the years, so I was able to reach out. My first 3 guests were Robert J. Sawyer, John Scalzi, and Tanya Huff, and then Julie Chernade, I guess my first 4 guests. And then I was talking to people like David Brin and Tad Williams and Joe Haldeman, big names in the field. And I've met some of them. And once I had a few of those and I'd done those, people would look at him and say, oh, well, this guy knows what he's doing. And, he's talked to these big names. And I've had very little trouble getting anybody that I want on the show. There's a few authors or their publicists who don't get back to me, but and I only do it every 2 weeks, so there's lots of time in there. And it's about the creative process. So we talk about how they got started writing, and then usually focusing on one book. We'll talk about idea generation, planning, outlining, writing, revision, editing, and then at the end I ask big philosophical questions like, why do you write? Why do you think human beings write? Why do we tell stories? And why science fiction and fantasy in particular. They're about an hour long. They come out every 2 weeks. And I'm coming up on my 100th episode very soon. In the next 3 or 4 episodes, I think I'll be up there.
Congratulations. That's awesome. Wow.
Right. Very nice. Yes, we've been doing this for over 3 years. So we really enjoyed it. So, we both want to know this question. What is left for you on your to-do list, your bucket list? Because you're not stopping anytime soon. We know that. And we're really glad. But, do you have something you really want to do? Like you want to take one of your books and you want to, produce it yourself, in film, or, do you have something like that you still want to do that you haven't done yet?
Well, I'm not a film producer, but I've written plays and I've directed plays and I've done all that sort of thing. Yeah. I do have somebody out there right now who's quite excited about the Worldshaper series and is trying to get something going with film or television, but I'm just kind of arm's length from that and hoping something comes of it. Give me lots of money. You don't have to make it. Just give me lots of money. I'll be fine with that. But I don't know. What do I want to do? I want every book I write. I hope that this is the one that will have more readers than the last one. I just want my stories to get out there and for people to enjoy them, because I think they're worth reading. So,
you like them. They're your favorite, right?
Yeah.
Some of your favorites.
I guess the one thing is on the publishing side, I would hope that I can get to the point where Shadowpaw Press can publish I've got the anthologies, which are other authors, but I'd like to maybe at some point start bringing out original anthologies or other people's novels. I've worked with a couple of writers around here that I've actually said, I would be interested in looking at that, but I'm a tiny, tiny publisher. So start at the top and work your way down to me. It would be my advice if it was me. So, but that is something I would like to do, is to kind of expand the Shadowpaw Press publishing empire beyond just me and the cat.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, you've got some amazing authors in the anthology. They're big name authors. I had a look at some of them. Were they friends of yours, or did you have to do some convincing to get them to buy into the idea?
All I did was, for the first one, I simply, after my first year was over, I talked to them all. I talked to every one of them for an hour. So, we'd already established that connection. And I just sent out an email and said, I'm thinking of doing this. Would you be interested in contributing either an original story or a reprint? And the first book, I had 9 original stories and 9 reprints. And in this one, the second year guests, for some reason, were even more gung-ho. And I have 18 original stories and only 6 reprints in this one. And people were very, even people who said they couldn't contribute were supportive of the idea. They thought it was a great idea. But, especially on the higher end of authordom, people are strapped for time, and they might not have time to write a short story or have anything that was free from, if all their reprint material was already being used somewhere. So I had a few people that would have done something if the timing had been different or whatever. But no, it hasn't taken any arm twisting to get anybody to come on board so far.
Well, I must say, I had a look at the Kickstarter project, and I was tickled pink by some of the videos there. And I thought, how could somebody possibly say no to supporting this project? It looks like some really fun authors in there.
Yeah, and the stories are, they run the gamut. I call it a cabinet of curiosities is the metaphor I'm using for the second book. like the 16th century rooms that were filled with oddities from natural science and stuff like that. So there's everything in here from space opera to supernatural fiction to alternate history to just humor. Like there's a story called "I Hid in the Bathroom When the Aliens Arrived," which was written by Lisa Foyles, who has a middle grade novel out, but she's actually best known as an actress. And it's very funny. And there's another one about that involves time travel and pizza, I guess is one way you describe it. So
pizza is good for anything. And especially if you're time traveling, you're going to be hungry. So
and I get to put a story of mine in there too. So there's one of mine in there, and it ties into the novel that's coming out next year. So if you're the publisher and editor, you get to do stuff like that.
That's right. Well, we appreciate you so much coming on and sharing all of this with us and our viewers. And we hope that you find some new fans today. I know that we certainly are, and we can't wait to have you back on. And we like to follow our authors along their journeys. And, when new things come out, we like to have them back on. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on. It was fun.
And thanks to all to everyone who's joined us live today. A huge big shout out to our amazing audience. That is why I do this. That's why we enjoy doing the show, because of you, the audience. So thanks everyone. Edward, thank you so much. And if you're watching this on the replay, this was the Writers Corner live show with Edward Willett. And do catch his upcoming book. You said the release date is 2nd of November, right? For the new one, the anthology. 2nd of November. Awesome. I won't forget that, because that'll be my 30th wedding anniversary. So I'll remember that date.
That's right. I know that too. Yes. Okay. So it's a big day for celebration. So anyway.
Big celebration day. Edward.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you to the audience who joined us today. Amazing. And Ross also agrees that she enjoyed the show today. So thanks very much, everyone. Take care, stay well, and stay safe. And see you right back next week, same time, same place.